Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast on wellbeing in higher education. So this is Dr. Hande Güzel, and in collaboration with the Cambridge Center for International Research, I'm doing this podcast series on wellbeing in higher education. And today I have another amazing guest, Dr. Nicole Brown, and we're going to be talking about ableism in higher education. So I'm going to first introduce Nicole to you, and then we're going to have a very exciting conversation on this topic. So Dr. Nicole Brown is a lecturer in education at University College London Institute of Education and Director of Social Research and Practice and Education Limited. Nicole gained her PhD in sociology at the University of Kent for her research into the construction of academic identity under the influence of fibromyalgia. She has edited a number of books, some of which are Lived Experiences of Ableism in Academia, Strategies for Inclusion in Higher Education, and Ableism in Academia, Theorizing Experiences of Disabilities and Chronic Illnesses in Higher Education. She has also co-authored Embodied Inquiry, Research Methods, and Making the Most of Your Research Journal. Nicole's research interests relate to the physical and material representations and metaphors, the generation of knowledge, and more generally, research methods and approaches to explore identity and body work, as well as to advanced learning and teaching within higher education. These are all amazing qualities, and very happy to have you here, Nicole. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. That's really kind. Thank you. And I'm pleased to be here. I'm excited about this.
Thank you. So am I. And I would like to start off by going back to the basics and talking about what is actually ableism and how do you define ableism if it's different from the mainstream research?
Thank you very much. So ableism is, this is the kind of the difficulty across anything that we do in higher education, is that everybody's got their own take and understanding, and there are different ways of interpreting and defining, and often those are also defined by which kind of disciplines we come from and which kind of background we've got. In the kind of general understanding of what ableism is, it's to do with the kind of understanding that we all expect to have normative and normal functioning able bodies and minds. And ableism then is this experience of actually this is not the reality, that the reality diverges from that ideal. And this is what ableism then is. Now, obviously, in that sense, ableism is the kind of the discriminative experience that we then have as a result of that. And the reason I'm kind of, it's really difficult to define that, but the reason I'm taking a lot of time around that is because ableism is not something that's only external. We all grow up with a particular kind of mindset and with particular kind of ideas. And therefore, this ableism is actually us discriminating against ourselves as much as well. So, for example, when we grow up, we all expect to have bodies that function at all times and minds that function at all times. And perhaps we expect to become hard of hearing or perhaps a bit slower and to have some aches and pains when we're 80 or 90 years of age, because that's the natural trajectory. That's what you would expect. So when you come to a point in your life where suddenly you are being diagnosed, for example, with a chronic health condition, or you're diagnosed with neurodivergence, or you're getting a label of a disability, whatever it is, at that stage, there is this internal function now that's disrupted. And it's a case of, well, I hadn't expected that. I expected to be fully functioning. So the first level is this internalized experience of that internalized expectation of our own selves as well. And as such, other people have been describing it. I'm using, for example, Fiona Kumari Campbell's definition. She's talking about that ableism is a network of beliefs and processes and practices that produces a particular kind of self and body, and as such, it's projected as the perfect species typical and essential and fully human. And disability then is cast as a diminished state of being. So it's just that idea of it's non-normative. Anything that's non-normative, that's where the ableism then comes in. This experience of the non-normative, self and other, really. I think I should stop there, because otherwise it feels like I'm just having a soliloquy, really.
I'm very happy to listen to you. This is very interesting that you talk about this distinction between external and internalized ableism. But I guess we can also say, from what you've described, there is always an interplay between the two, right? It's not that we, out of the blue, just decide that we should have an always functioning body, but it's because that's how we're taught that our bodies should be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's obviously the kind of the experience of anyone in academia who's got a disability or chronic illness or neurodivergence, is that you are being othered, that's not the norm, that's not normal, that's not accepted, that's outside of what's to be expected. And obviously this is enculturated and embedded in our upbringing. I mean, it starts with a lot of the time disabilities being hidden and invisible, or chronic conditions and neurodivergence. So, for example, if we think back to our own childhood where we went to school, how many teachers do we know had a disability or a chronic illness or a neurodivergence? And it's that kind of, even the everyday life of a young child, they are basically just put into this position of seeing everybody functioning at all times. It's very rare that a teacher is different or has got a disability that's visible. There are many of us who obviously don't have fully functioning bodies, and we do have chronic illnesses, but it's hidden away. And the more it's hidden away, then the more we are brought up, and we're bringing up the next generation in such a way that, it's to be expected that we have got bodies that function at all times.
So you've actually identified two different problems there, right? So one of them is that we don't really have a lot of people with disabilities that we can look up to, or that take up space in our teaching spaces. But then there are people who actually do fit into that category, but they're not actually freely able to talk about their differences or divergence.
Yeah, so I mean, in academia, it's compounded even further. So if we're looking at the statistics, we know that there is a drop-off rate from undergraduate students to postgraduate taught students. There is another drop-off rate between postgraduate taught, postgraduate research students, and then again between postgraduate research and actual people in academia with jobs, employments. And that drop-off rate of disclosure is basically there are several tendencies at play. First of all, there are people that are generally within academia. There are people that are prevented from going into studies because of their personal circumstances in the first place. So we, as a whole, we don't have as many disabled people in academia as the general public would suggest. So there is that discrepancy. But then the next thing is that the drop-off rates at the particular transition points, they are telling a different story. So there is obviously those people that are dropping out. So there may be somebody who can cope still with undergraduate studies, but the disability or the chronic illness has taken a different turn, and they don't enter into the postgraduate taught or research element. So there's that trend that's at play, that people do drop out. But also the people that do stay, they don't feel that there's a point in disclosing. So what I've written about is that disclosure in academia is really a cost-benefit analysis. And what people are doing at a personal level for themselves, and I'm not saying that they are doing that as a formal cost-benefit analysis. It's often done subconsciously and unconsciously, but people are weighing up the cost of being stigmatized, of being different, of being marginalized, and of being categorized in a particular way, against the benefit of the support that they get. Now, we know from undergraduate studies, at undergraduate studies level, we know from the statistics and from the student surveys that for those students, in a way, it pays to disclose their condition, because they are able to access, for example, extensions, or they are allowed to have additional support systems like laptops, software, whatever it is. So for the undergraduate student, in that sense, the benefits outweigh the cost, because yes, okay, I may be known as the person with dyslexia, but I really get, you know, this package here that will help me do my studies, and it will mean that I'm getting through this more easily, more comfortably, with a better grade. So yes, for me, it pays to therefore disclose. At the level, as we continue through the transition points, that benefit drops off and the stigmatization increases. So by the time we get to academic staff, for example, that scale has completely tipped to the opposite. And for a lot of people, being othered, being stigmatized, being considered as the person who has got whatever condition it is, basically is by far outweighing any kind of benefits. And the reason that is happening is, for example, when we're looking at things like extensions, well, what kind of extension does an academic get? No, there are no real extensions for any kind of work. So that's not there. In terms of the help packages, I mean, that varies greatly across universities. There are some universities who are very, very good at supplying additional support for members of staff. But then there are other universities where I've heard from members of staff that they basically sign up to modules in their own university as students, as part of the professional development plans, so that they are then enrolled as students and can access student services and gain the kind of support systems that they need. Now, to me, this is hugely problematic, because obviously we've now got academics taking away some of the budget that's allocated to students in order to be able to do their professional academic work, and they shouldn't have to enroll as students in that way. But unfortunately, that is the reality, that people are bypassing the system, because how the system is set up at the moment is that, you know, the stigmatization, the othering is there, but the support really isn't. And I just have to say, the othering and the stigmatization is a lot of the time when a scholar, an academic, says, I have got whatever it then is, the danger or the main risk is that that person is then seen as this disability scholar advocate, and no longer as a scholar in their own right. So I may be, for example, if I'm using myself as an example, I'm obviously a lecturer in education, but I'm obviously also doing this ableism work, and I'm known for that now. Now, for me, that's okay, but not everybody may want to be associated with that kind of work. It may be that, you know, my educational research and my work as an educational practitioner should be taking the sort of becoming more to the fore. And that is one of the reasons why academics also feel that they can't actually disclose.
Mm. Okay, you've given us a lot of different things there to think about. So, okay. I just need to go through them one by one. The example that you gave about the staff members who have to become students to actually access resources, I think that's quite mind-blowing, and just very big failure of the system, and a very big problem in so many different ways. Yes. But it just, I understand that universities are, you know, neoliberal institutions and they're geared more towards students, but they're also supposed to help out staff. Like, technically, they're the ones that are providing the teaching. So how do we make them? How do we make them aware that this type of support, even extensions as well, so someone who might have neurodivergence might need more time marking exams than someone who doesn't. So how do we make them start thinking about these adjustments at the very least?
Well, I mean, there's two things here. First of all, I don't like to think about adjustments. So the first element is that it has to, the environment has to be built in such a way that everybody can do the best work, the best to their ability, and any kind of structural barriers or obstacles are removed, so that we don't need any adjustments anymore. So that would be the ideal place, is that everybody is basically catered for as a matter of course. And then you don't need those kind of extra extensions or whatever. In practical terms, and I think that's probably at the heart of many of these things, in practical terms, we have to go back to, well, how do universities get their income? The universities, although yes, the staff are the people that are kind of keeping the students happy, ultimately it's the students that pay the fees, it's the students that bring in the money. And therefore, I would suggest that many institutions are listening to the student voice more than they listen to the voice of the people that they are employing, because that is where the customer comes. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but in terms of what can be done about it, I mean, there's a lot, there are quite a few of us who are doing this kind of activist work, and with every opportunity that we have, for example, like today, talking about those things, doing podcasts, doing interviews, or going to conferences, being involved in different committees at our own institutions, but also across other institutions, and just constantly chipping away at different kinds of places, and basically just, like highlighting the problems that we are encountering. I think that's the first step. So there is, I always say that any kind of change regarding equality and equity issues around disability has to be a top-down and bottom-up approach. So the bottom-up is the one where individuals are leading by examples. So, for example, the studentship, they have got a voice. They can make their voices heard. So what they could say is, for example, as part of their programs, well, if I'm getting extension of 2 weeks, because I've got, whatever adjustments made for me, then I would like to be handing down that 2-week extension to the person who's marking my essays. I mean, in my case, very recently, I have finished, the module marking of my own module, where there is 197 students enrolled. And this year, 80 of them had an extension of 2 weeks. And that's fine. I totally understand. It's unprecedented times, and everybody has got very, very good reasons. And I'm not denying them the value of those 2 extra weeks. But on my end, I'm getting 80 essays 2 weeks later, but I'm still having to complete my marking within the original 4-week turnaround. And that's where it becomes problematic. Now, if the studentship then turns around and says, well, yes, I've submitted 2 weeks late, and I'm not expecting my feedback within 4 weeks from the original submission date, but within 4 weeks from the date that I'm submitting, then that gives me as the marker 2 extra weeks to work. And that's where, the bottom-up approach comes in. As lecturers, again, bottom-up approach is to lead by example. So doing little things, and it is often just the little things, allowing people extra time, or being, approaching and approachable, and at the same time empathetic and listening to each other's needs. That's one of those things that I, as an individual, can do within a big institution. But then obviously there is this other element that you do have to have a top-down approach as well, with clear accountability, with clear policies and strategies. And that's something that has to be kind of worked through different different levels in a hierarchy within an institution. So I always go back to this example, change doesn't happen quickly. And there's this joke about, how do you eat an elephant? Well, bite by bite. And that's the same thing here. Yes, asking for that kind of change that I'm asking for is a massive thing. And I'm asking for the entire, I'm basically asking for the entire sector to change their thinking. And that's a massive thing to ask for. But if all of us chip away a little bit here, a little bit there, you can see how the more awareness and more empathy are happening.
Brilliant. Okay, again, a lot of things to think about. I think one of the most important things you said was how we need a collaboration between students and staff members, because from my experience and from what I've observed, there are a lot of different groups that are speaking up for themselves in universities, but students and staff members are usually quite staying apart from each other, perhaps because the mechanisms through which they have to work are different. But what you're saying is really important when a student actually can talk about receiving the grade later. But then I was also thinking about how there are these, bureaucratic processes of, there has to be the undergraduate education committee meeting or whatever it's called that has to approve the marks. So you would maybe not have the extension that the student would suggest. So that, I think that's where the top-down approach also comes in, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But can I just say, I mean, I know what you're saying, that, even if the student says, I'm happy to hand over this extension to the lecturer, it may not happen. I agree with that. But it goes back to the case of, the more people do that, the less likely the university will actually ignore it, because this is the student voice after all. So if student unions are behind that and actually saying, certain things we have to be, careful about, and we and yes, okay, we would like to have our feedback within 4 weeks, but not within 4 weeks of the original submission, but the submission point of at which point the students submit their work. Then that is something, that's something where the student union can play quite a big role, because as academics, we do receive the reports from the student union, and we often get demands, and on our end it then feels like, well, this is us listening to you, but are you listening to us? We also have difficulties. We also have childcare responsibilities or duties to care for our family. We also have, our own health or mental health issues. And a lot of the time, anyone who's chronically ill, disabled or neurodivergent has got a lot more of that emotional labor that they have to do, which makes those people even extra tired, if you like. And then it's really easy to just dismiss that, to say, well, we all get tired. Well, no, the students should be just as empathetic as the lecturers should be. And I'm not saying that all of the lecturers get it right. I'm not saying that at all. But, if the students are asking of us that we are empathetic, then they should also try to be empathetic to the person in front of them.
Yes, I think that's a very important point, because it's a lot of times we listen to students and they're, needing for extension, but then that might come at the expense of our own well-being.
Yes.
So I guess we also have to be not putting this is actually putting the emotional labor on the teaching staff, but there has to be a way to actually say no to students, not saying no as in you're not allowed an extension. But to have that balance between our own well-being and to what extent we can cater that versus cater our own mental health.
Yes, and that's, I mean, in the obviously in the heat of the things, that often, it's those kinds of things that then get lost. And again, I'm not saying that this is an intention on the part of the students or an intention on the part of the academic staff. Everybody's just got so many demands placed on them, and everybody's just trying to muddle through what are unprecedented and difficult times. So, some of the things in the heat of that moment, they do happen. What we have to learn is to genuinely listen to one another. We just have to say, okay, well, okay, I'm asking you to do this. You respond in a way that makes me feel like you're angry with me. Why is that? Is there a way that I have misunderstood, or that I have placed too much in terms of demand? And that's something that, where at the end of the day, it's a relationship that's happening between staff and students. And what I'm trying to say is, just because the staff member hasn't disclosed doesn't mean they don't have a disability. Because likelihood is people haven't disclosed. We know that from the statistics. So likelihood is that the person in front of us will have some kind of, chronic condition, neurodivergence, chronic illness, whatever it is, disability, however you want to define it. They probably do have something going on, but they probably haven't disclosed it. That's what the statistics tell us. I mean, we just have to look at things like, for example, color blindness. Color blindness is actually really, really common amongst the population of the Northern European countries. 1 in 12 male people will have color blindness. 1 in 12. That's huge amounts of people. So likelihood is all of us are in some way connected with somebody who's got color blindness. But how many do we know of? And that's the kind of thing that we have to kind of always bear in mind. So if we're looking at the statistics, when it's said 1 in 10 are neurodivergent, or 1 in 5 are deaf, whatever it is, we'll try and put that into your classroom. Think of your classroom of 100 people. Well, if it's 1 in 10, that means 10 out of the people that you have in front of you may potentially have a hearing disability, for example.
So, okay, 2 things that I want to ask you now is, one of them is, because you said we shouldn't actually have to have adjustments, but we should always make it accessible to all possible divergences, right? So this is something that we have a lot. For instance, in Cambridge, we receive student support documents, which are confidential, but they detail a student's chronic illness, disability, learning difficulty, so that we can actually adapt our teaching to their needs. So in an ideal world, we would not even need those documents. And we would make it accessible to all potential differences.
Yes, that would be the ideal. I mean, realistically, we cannot cater for all of the needs of all of the people at all of the times. So there would still be, in reality, even with this ideal, there would still be some kind of adjustment document required, because you wouldn't be able to meet all of the people's needs at all of the time. So, for example, simply because the needs are conflicting. So if I'm giving you 2 examples, one from the online world and one from the in-person world, the 3D world. So if we're looking at the virtual space, there are people with sensory processing disorders or sensory processing dysfunctions, which may be a symptom in or a condition in themselves, or it may be part of, for example, a side effect of medication or treatment people are getting. So the sensory processing thing is a big thing. For those people that have got those kinds of sensory processing issues, they will find it incredibly overloading to see 100 people's cameras switched on with backgrounds, especially if the background is busy. Which is why I've got this virtual background, because I can't, my background at home here is quite a busy, a lot of posters, a lot of pictures, a lot of stuff going on behind me. And it would just be overloading people's senses and therefore basically causing issues for them. So I've got this virtual background to kind of drone out, if you like, the kind of the busyness of it. Now, those are the people that would ideally want to have the video switched off altogether, because even me fiddling with my arms like as I do is actually quite sort of triggering and demanding on them. On the other hand, we've got people with hearing disabilities. They will want to see the person who's speaking simply because they're using the body language and lips to help them understand what's going on. So even if they're not consciously learning how to lip read, they will use cues from the person in front of them to actually help them understand what's being said. So on the one hand, we ought to have the cameras off.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we ought to have the cameras on at the same time. It's not possible. So you can only make that compromise, and a lot of the compromise situations that I have encountered in this last few months is that the speaker has the video on and everybody else has got their video off, which, you know, makes sense in a way, but it's only a poor compromise. It's not really feeding into everybody's needs. So that's one example of where we've got this kind of conflicting needs issue. The other one in the real world space, for anyone who may have not even noticed that, next time you go out and you try and cross a road, have a look at the floor and consciously take in what the floor feels like and looks like. In the UK, we have these little knobs on the curb as you cross the road, which are there for people with visual disabilities to basically highlight to them that actually now you're stepping into the road. You're now leaving the safety of the pavement. You're now stepping into the road. So this is a visual, is a visual help, is a visual aid, but it's also quite an embodied aid, because as you tread on it, you can obviously, with your feet, you can feel the difference. So people will notice, okay, now I'm treading off the pavement and onto the street. Anyone with a wheelchair will tell you how painful those knobs are. Because yes, okay, the more modern wheelchairs do have shock absorbers and they've got softer wheels, but it's still rattling as you rattle over those things. So again, conflicting needs. You can't take the knobs away, because then you're obviously disadvantaging the people that generally need them. So the compromise is in the UK that we have the knobs there, and anyone who's in a wheelchair has to put up with the rattling over those knobs. There isn't really an ideal solution to that. What's the solution? You can't take the knobs away. And you can't have a section where there are no knobs so that the wheelchair user could go past it, because then the safety would again be compromised for those people with visual disabilities. So that's where, you know, like, even if we're talking about this ideal of having everything in place for everyone, realistically, it's actually not doable. So that's the one thing that needs to be said about that. And the other thing is then, in terms of, there are still many things that we can do as a matter of course. So for example, we know that black writing on white background is not ideal for a number of people. It's not ideal for people with dyslexia. It's not ideal for people with Erlen syndrome, because the letters start dancing around and they don't seem to sit still. It's not ideal for anyone with sensory processing dysfunctions or issues, because the contrast is too stark between the black and the white. So ideally, we would have a different kind of color combination, and that's something that we can all do as a matter of course. So most of my slides are dark blue writing on light blue background. That seems to have worked very well and seems to have worked fine for me. But it doesn't have to be that color combination. It could be a different one, as long as you're aware that that red and green blindness, color blindness, for example, is again problematic. So you want to avoid certain color combinations because they would be too similar. But for example, like I said, all of my slides, as a matter of course, are dark blue on light blue background. And for those that do need it, it's helpful. And for those that don't need it, most of them don't even notice. So it's that kind of thing again, where I'm saying actually there are many things that we can do as a matter of course, but there is obviously a trade-off with specific kinds of needs where we're not going to be able to meet everybody's needs at all times.
Yeah, great examples, and thank you so much for that. But it's just, it baffles me that it's like a very simple solution to have that color combination for a lot of people. But that's something that a lot of people, including me, didn't know about, or didn't know the impact of that. So I think also boils down to actually having access to this kind of information that actually can help people.
I agree with you, and that's, I mean, that was one of the big things of my own work. It was about exploring ableism. It was about exploring the experience of people with disabilities and chronic illnesses in higher education. But it's actually going a lot further. It's trying to say to people, well, here are some recommendations of, you know, that are relevant and that come out of people's experiences. So the book that you mentioned at the beginning, The Lived Experiences of Ableism in Academia, Strategies for Inclusion in Higher Education, that's been published with Policy Press, is doing exactly that. So all of the chapters are written by people with personal experiences of some kind of disability. And at the end, and they're basically theorizing, they're explaining what it feels like to have whatever it is they have. They're then just theorizing that experience through embedding it in scholarly exploration and theorization. And then in the kind of the final part of each chapter, they offer practical reflection questions and practical recommendations from their own experiences. And I mean, the experiences are vast. You know, there's somebody there writing about colitis, somebody else writing about color blindness, somebody else writing about mental health issues. There is a chapter on deafness. There is a chapter on autism. So there are a lot of different kinds of experiences that are kind of captured in that. And obviously, yes, I agree with you. We just have to try and basically share those kinds of nuggets of information, which is, you know, like I said, some of it is really simple to do. But it's again chipping away constantly and just trying to share the word and share the experiences, and again going back to listening to the experiences. So I mean, in my own work, I have kind of changed the way I'm starting meetings. So I used to say something like, you know, hello, we're meeting here to do this, this, and this, and that's how I've kind of set the agenda for any kind of meeting that I would have had. Nowadays, most of the time, I'm starting the meeting with "How can I help?" And I mean, this comes for those of you who are watching TV a lot. You may know that phrase from the New Amsterdam series, where the medical director uses that as well. And he's always asking his members of staff, how can I help? And actually, I quite like that, because it's generally, you know, yes, we are meeting here, but I'm listening to you. You tell me how I can help you. It's not me, it's not us here discussing the adjustments and I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm asking you, how can I help? And if you tell me something that is not in the system or is not in the process, I can then explore that opportunity. I may not be able to accommodate that, but I will be trying to. And that's that, with that phrase of reframing the kind of conversation into how can I help you, that's generally helped. It's a case of basically giving people an opportunity to say what they really need. And that phrase is really helpful.
That's brilliant. And that reminds me of a conversation I had with a student who required some accommodations during the teaching. And they had told me how knowing what's coming up in the session, so knowing the structure, really helps them. So just, you know, knowing what we're going to discuss in today's like 1 hour teaching that we're going to do. And that's something that I hadn't thought about before speaking to her. And once we did that, I started doing it for all of my teaching. And I really saw that it helped everyone. And now I don't need anyone to tell me that they need it, because it's there.
But there may be something else that somebody comes up and tells you that's a useful way of doing it.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
there may be something else that you're not doing at the moment, where, you know, someone else is going to come to you and say, actually, could you do it this way, that would help me as well. So, and this is exactly what I'm saying, you know, it is about listening to each other. Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, I always use this example, student voice, you can listen to, and you should listen to, but there is a limit. And that has to be recognized as well. So, for example, I always brought this, I know that this is an sort of an abstract, obscure example, but it's really, it drives it home. So I've always said to my students, look, you can tell me anything you want, but I'm not going to promise you that I can give it to you. For example, if you were to say to me you wanted a horse in the classroom, I'm going to have to say, yes, it would be sweet, but I can't do that because it would be too risky. That horse could bolt. It could basically poo in the corner. Who would be dealing with the consequences of the broken chairs and the mess in the classroom? So I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to say, okay, I can't give you the horse, but I can give you a hamster in a cage. And that analogy really drives it home to the students that actually, yes, they should bring all of their needs, all of their concerns to you, but there will be limitations to what you can do. And this is going back to what I said at the beginning. The students need to understand that sometimes you have to say no, or you can't do things, not because you want to be mean, but because there just isn't the scope. And that's where the students need to show empathy to the person in front of them, to say, okay, well, I'm accepting your professional judgment here that a horse really isn't a good idea. And I'll accept the goldfish or the hamster instead.
So it's about both keeping the communication open and being flexible to the extent that we can.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant.
And I think that's it's really important to basically just like work together and try to kind of understand each other. And that phrase, how can I help, should be at the heart of it, because that means that if I as a lecturer go into a meeting with a student, how can I help? And then the student can say, well, I need da 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 da, and the student can then turn it back to the lecturer and say, well, how can I help you? So it goes both ways, because obviously if the student comes with a list of 10 demands, then, there may be some that I can do myself and some where I'm going to need help. If the student can then, if I can say, demand 2, 3, and 4 is something I can't do, but so-and-so can, the student can take it to so-and-so, that would help me as well. So the how can I help goes both ways. It's a nice way of introducing empathetic listening.
Brilliant. And I know it's been a while since you mentioned that, but I found the chapters you mentioned in your book very insightful, and I think a lot of people can actually, both students and staff members can benefit highly from that. So thanks for mentioning that. I want to go back to this idea, and we talked a lot about it, but about disclosure, because we said a few different things about it. One of them is that people prefer not to disclose so that they are not stigmatized. But then at the same time, in the beginning, we talked about how, as a result of people not disclosing, students, for instance, are not seeing the staff members present, visible, taking up space as disabled or neurodivergent or whatever disability or difference they have. So how do we resolve this dilemma?
Basically make the environment such that academics feel more comfortable disclosing. That's how you break the cycle, because essentially it's a vicious circle. Exactly. Of people not disclosing, so there are no role models, so I'm not disclosing, so there are no so it's this constant circle. The only way to break it is if academics come out and start disclosing. And for that to happen, the scale that I was talking about earlier, that balance between cost and benefit, needs to shift in favor of the benefits. And at the moment, I mean, we also, you were saying what I said earlier, that disclosure is obviously people don't want to disclose because they don't want to be stigmatized. But it's not just that. In order to be able to say, I have got cancer, I have got diabetes, I have got schizophrenia. In order to be able to say these things, you have to come to terms with those things at a personal level first. So a disclosure requires a lot of personal, emotional, and private work ahead of the actual public act of disclosing. So it's not just about stigmatization, it's also about, again, going back to the idea of the internalized ableism, is the idea of actually you have to come to terms with that first. Once the person has to come to terms with it, then we need to make sure that when they disclose, they get the support they need without then being pushed into any kind of particular category. Mm-hmm. At the moment, as it stands, I'm obviously a spokesperson for disabilities, which basically means that any time that a university requires a spokesperson for disability, my name pops up because that's what I'm known for now. Yeah. And that's, again, it's totally fine by me and I'm happy with that, but not everybody will be. Mm-hmm. And the kind of things that happen as a consequence is anytime that there is an interview panel, a hiring panel, and a committee for whatever advancement or enhancement of teaching and learning, whatever it is, anytime you need a spokesperson for disability, how many people are they going to have and who they're going to have and who they're going to call? Well, those few people that they know of. And that's the same. It's not just a disability thing, by the way. This is the same for anyone within, for example, the Black and ethnic minority groups. You are then suddenly the Black token person on the panel. The same is true for women in academia. You're suddenly the token woman on the panel. Whatever it is, you know. And actually, in this case, I'm ticking two boxes. I'm the disability person and the woman. So it's, you know, get buy one get one free. So it's that kind of attitude where you've then got the problem of actually additional labor and additional demands placed on the person who has been disclosing their condition. And therefore, it goes back to that cost benefit analysis. That's not necessarily a benefit. I mean, I know some people see it as a benefit, but it's not necessarily a benefit to be suddenly called on to 15 different educational committee panels and interview hiring panels, whatever it is. That's additional labor. That's additional work that I'm not getting paid for. That is not in my job description. That what am I getting out of this? And this is the kind of questions that people ask themselves, and that's the kind of, you know, context of how people work out the cost and the benefit. So it goes back to basically improving the situation means getting more academics to disclose their conditions or their disabilities. And you can only do that by actually changing the way how the cost benefit system works. So that disclosing that you're disabled does not necessarily mean that you're put onto all sorts of extra panels and committees and task forces. That it actually means that this is the support that you're getting and this is what we're going to do. And we are going to help you to achieve the best for you and for us. Back to the question, how can we help? It's always the same kind of things. And it feels quite repetitive in many ways. And I'm sorry about that. But it is that is the only way of actually going about it. So what we need to do is we need to teach line managers to know how to support people with disabilities. If we are starting at the line management level, we then need to go a step further. We need to look at senior management team members. That means we need to go a step further. And actually, you know what, at the end of the day, it has to come from right the top. So any kind of engagement is, again, it's this idea of bottom up and top down. You have to get the buy-in from the top and then try and make changes from the bottom up. And everyone can pitch in. As soon as anyone, that doesn't matter whether they are students, professional services staff, academic staff, teaching only staff, it doesn't really matter. Everyone can pitch in by basically just raising awareness and being more empathetic. And that's kind of the starting point for everything. Because if we experience more awareness and more empathy more widely, then it's also easier to say, I've got diabetes, I have got schizophrenia, I have got cancer. That as long as that's not there, it's obviously problematic. The other thing is also some conditions are easier than others. It's easier to say I've got cancer than to say I've got schizophrenia because of the stigmatization attached to the actual label. So that's the other thing that we can do, is that actually, you know, what, we're no longer recognizing schizophrenia as this thing that's badly understood and completely wrongly represented and misrepresented in media. That we're actually trying to, again, raise awareness and make a point of, you know, it doesn't bother me whatever it is that you've got. You don't need to tell me any details. It should be sufficient for people to say, look, I need help, without actually having to go into great detail as to what the ins and outs are. Because whose business is that, really?
Yeah, great. So the idea is to actually reduce the emotional labor on the side of the person who has to disclose,
Yes,
who doesn't actually, and to make the whole process easy, and both emotional and physical labor, I guess, because of the committees that you're meant to.
And also,
attend.
I think being an advocate, even if you're not disabled yourself, doesn't mean that you can't be an advocate for disability. And the same is true for any kind of other protected characteristics. You know, I don't have to be part of the LGBTQ community in order to support them and their rights. You know, I don't have to be, you know. So, and that's the same here. You know, you don't have to be disabled to be advocating for disability equality.
Sure, because ableism is toxic for everyone anyway.
Yes,
even if you're not disabled. Yeah.
And in reality, there are intersectional experiences. You know, it's not as simple as saying, well, this person is disabled, this person is black, this person is gay. It's not like that. You will get the gay, disabled, black person all in one.
Okay, so I want to now talk about, and we talked about researchers, we talked about students, this category that lies in between, which is very close to my heart, having finished my PhD last year. PhD students / researchers, they are staff members and they're students.
Yes.
They have a lot of labor to do for their PhDs, but also to earn a living. They're just in this gray area. So how does ableism play out in that scenario where someone is a researcher?
I mean, that's one of the things that I was particularly interested in as well, because obviously I had started out with focusing on academic staff. And I did quite a lot of work around, specifically around fibromyalgia myself. And then I had other people contributing to the book. So I was involved with more different kinds of disabilities, chronic illnesses and neurodivergencies, but they were mostly academic staff in some kind of permanent or semi-permanent role. And obviously there is a lot about undergraduate students and the experience of disabilities at undergraduate level. But like you said, you know, the PhD students are kind of in between everything. So I specifically actually investigated the experience of doctoral students. And I did a research project just on that. And what is interesting to see is they are, I would suggest, out of all of the people that we're looking at, they are probably most consciously deciding the cost benefit. It's really interesting to watch that, but they are seriously negotiating different kinds of identities where they are feeling that, you know, that in many ways they are still students and they're still behaving in that way, that they're trying to get the support systems in place that they need for that, to cater for them, to support them, to be able to do the kind of doctoral work that's required of them. But at the same time, they completely conscious, like I would say hyper conscious of the fact that they are at the brink of entering a marketplace where they will then actually be judged against people who don't have disabilities, and where they don't want to necessarily come across as the difficult person because they have got the disabilities. So I would suggest that at that level, the PhD students are probably the ones that are feeling the pressure of the negotiation between disclosure and not disclosure, probably the strongest. I'm afraid I don't really have an answer to the conundrum that we are facing there. I mean, one thing that I have noticed is that these people are very, very adept at making their visible disabilities invisible. They have learned to navigate the space in such a way that they basically can pass as if they didn't have any disabilities, although in reality their life is quite strongly influenced by whatever condition they've got. I don't have an answer. I'm really sorry about that.
No, that's expected. But I guess I was thinking about how this is true, like the whole idea of the marketplace being difficult for all sectors, perhaps. But within academia, there's this extra pressure to do so many different things at the same time, to publish, to attend conferences, to organize conferences, to teach, and then to do your own research. And we know that free time means you get to write your paper. So I guess the pressure then for a doctoral researcher doubles or triples as they're trying to find their place in this marketplace. If they also have a disability, it just gets multiplied.
Yes. And the reality is that many disabled, and that's, we've got several realities here. One of them is that a lot of PhD students with disabilities drop out. Mm-hmm. They don't ever finish. So that's one element, which is why also we then have got that transition from PhD student to academic jobs, where we've got this transition point where the numbers drop off again in terms of disclosure. It's because people have actually dropped out. So we do get that. The other thing that we get is that these people are then often put into one specific role. So they would be having, for example, teaching only jobs or research only jobs. That they don't necessarily get this kind of, academic role where you do everything, but that they are kind of, categorized in one specific way or in one specific direction. That's the other reality. And the final reality is, sorry, I've lost my plot now. The first one, I was thinking about three things. The first is that people drop out. The second is that people get put in, I remember. Yeah, so the first one is people drop out. The second is that people get put into specific categories for kinds of jobs. And the third one is that people take part-time jobs. They don't take full-time jobs. It's because what they do is they take part-time jobs of, say, 2 or 3 days a week, and the rest of the week they're using to recuperate, regain their energy levels so that they can do their jobs again. And again, that's the reality of it. I'm not saying that that's a good solution, but that is how it's panning out at the moment. I and many people like me are consistently lobbying with specific kinds of groups. So research funders, for example, the Wellcome Trust. I've been collaborating with Springer regarding their kind of understanding of EDI issues. I have also spoken to Advance Haiti on a number of occasions. I have more recently been involved with UKRI, where we are talking about all of those things. How can we truly be inclusive if we've got all these problems that we are encountering? What needs to be done? And one of the things that I'm saying is that the people that are most often the people that are disabled, chronically ill or neurodivergent, their research work is quite different from the £5 million project in a lab somewhere, and therefore it doesn't often get recognized in that same way. So again, the disability person gets pushed into a particular category, and that's something that we have to counteract. At the moment, there are a few of us who are trying to make a difference, but obviously the change is massive that's required.
It is, but thanks for all the work that you're doing on behalf of so many people. Could I ask you if there are people who want to help out with this advocacy work?
Yeah, get in touch with. Yes, get in touch with me. The easiest way to reach me is probably on Twitter at Ableism Academia. So that's specifically about this kind of advocacy work and the anything to do with ableism in academia. That's what I'm doing there. Yeah, I mean, also can get in touch with me via the UCL IOE address. So I'm on the UCL Iris page, which is our staff profile page, and people can get in touch with me there too. I'd be more than happy to kind of receive any help that I can get, and any opportunity to spread the word further. Absolutely. And if anyone fancies organising another Ableism in Academia conference, it's overdue. The one that we did was in March 2018. So yeah, it's overdue. We ought to have a follow-up now. So anyone wanting to pitch in with that would be great.
Okay, it's great that we've put the word out. So we're going to be wrapping up. I want to ask you first, is there anything else you would like to add? And in both cases, either or not, is there anything that you would like the audience to leave this session with?
Thank you very much. So I would just say, first of all, I would like to say thank you, Hande, to actually enable me to talk about this. I really appreciate the opportunity here that you're giving me this platform to spread the word further. And to anyone who was watching this, just two things really: try to be empathetic, try to listen to what's happening or around you, and try to become attuned with that. So that's the first thing I'm asking you, is try to listen, to become empathetic. And the other one is, when you notice something is not quite right, speak up. I think it's so important, especially now with the pandemic having hit us, all of those experiences. There are so many people who are struggling through mental health issues all by themselves. If you come across someone who perhaps doesn't look happy, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a fellow student, it can be a staff member, it can be the provost of your university, it doesn't really matter. Just ask them, how can I help? It's such a powerful phrase, and it may just be the one phrase that's actually genuinely helping that person to come out of a depth of desperation that you may not even be aware of. So I would suggest, yeah, those are the two things that I would like to kindly ask everyone to do, is to be empathetic and to ask, how can I help?
Brilliant. I think we're all going to leave with, how can I help? And I think if we can all ask one person that today, that's going to make a change in a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This was very, very insightful, and I've learned a lot, and I hope the audience learns a lot as well, and I'm sure they will. Thank you so much for your time and for everything you've shared.
That's all right. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to be back with another episode soon. And this was on ableism in higher education. And do get in touch with Nicole if you want to help out with advocacy work. Thanks.